Special Agent in Charge. Marcus Thornton had been with the FBI for 23 years, working his way up from field agent to leading the Philadelphia field office's organized crime and gang section. At 48, he'd investigated drug trafficking organizations, violent gangs, public corruption, and white-collar crime that devastated communities. Today's assignment was different, but no less important. For the past 6 months, the FBI had received complaints about organized retail theft rings operating throughout Philadelphia's shopping districts. These weren't random shoplifters. They were coordinated operations involving lookouts, boosters who stole merchandise, and fences who sold stolen goods. The rings were sophisticated, violent when confronted, and cost retailers millions annually. Intelligence suggested these operations had protection. Security personnel at various malls who looked the other way or actively facilitated thefts in exchange for payoffs. But proving it required someone on the inside, watching how security actually operated when they thought no one was paying attention. Which is why Marcus was currently dressed in clothes he'd borrowed from a homeless shelter, walking into Riverside Mall at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. He looked the part convincingly. Worn jeans with a tear at the knee, a faded jacket with a broken zipper, scuffed boots, and a backpack that had seen better days. His normally clean-shaven face now bore 3 days of stubble. His hair was intentionally messy. He moved with the careful shuffle of someone dealing with chronic pain or exhaustion. To any observer, he was exactly what he appeared to be: a homeless man who'd wandered into an upscale shopping mall, probably looking for a warm place to rest or a bathroom to use. Marcus had done undercover work before: drug buys, gang infiltration, corruption investigations. But there was something uniquely uncomfortable about pretending to be society's most vulnerable while watching how people treated those they perceived as powerless. He entered through the main entrance, immediately drawing looks from shoppers. Some glanced away quickly. Others stared with expressions ranging from pity to disgust to fear. A mother pulled her child closer as he passed. Marcus made his way slowly through the mall, observing. The retail theft rings operated during daytime hours when stores were busy and security was spread thin. His job was to position himself where he could watch both potential theft activity and security response without drawing attention. He found a bench near the food court, a spot with clear sight lines to several high-end retailers that had reported significant losses. He sat down carefully, setting his backpack beside him, and pulled out a worn paperback book he'd brought as a prop. Within minutes, a security guard approached. The guard was in his early 30s, heavy-set, with the kind of swagger that suggested he enjoyed the authority his uniform provided. His name tag read Derek Mitchell, Senior Security Officer. "Excuse me," Derek said, his tone already aggressive. "You can't be here." Marcus looked up from his book. "I'm not bothering anyone. Just sitting. This is private property. We don't allow loitering." "I'm not loitering. I'm resting on a public bench in a shopping mall." "Public?" Derek laughed. "This is private property. And we have standards about who can be here. You need to leave." Marcus kept his voice calm, non-confrontational. "What standards am I violating? Look at yourself. You're homeless. You're making customers uncomfortable. I'm sitting quietly reading a book." "How is that making anyone uncomfortable?" Derek's face flushed. "Don't argue with me. I'm telling you to leave. If you don't go voluntarily, I'll escort you out." Marcus had been here less than 10 minutes and was already experiencing exactly what the FBI had been told to expect. Security personnel who profiled and harassed people based on appearance rather than actual behavior. "I have a right to be in a public shopping area as long as I'm not breaking any laws or disrupting." "You're disrupting right now by arguing. Stand up. You're leaving." Other shoppers were watching now. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed to approve of Derek's aggressive approach. A teenager had her phone out, recording. Marcus stood slowly, deliberately non-threatening. "Fine. I'll leave, but I'd like your supervisor's name for a formal complaint." Derek laughed again. "Supervisor? Yeah, sure. His name is Goef-Quote." He caught himself, aware of the phone's recording. His name is none of your business. Now move. Marcus walked toward the exit, Derek following close behind. As they passed one of the high-end retailers Marcus had been monitoring, he noticed something. Two young men in their 20s, working together, one blocking a security camera's view while the other stuffed designer handbags into a large shopping bag. Marcus's trained eye caught what most people would miss: the coordination, the practiced movements, the way a third person near the store entrance was watching for security. But Derek wasn't watching the actual theft happening 30 feet away. He was focused entirely on escorting the homeless man out of his mall. They reached the main entrance. Derek stood with arms crossed, watching to make sure Marcus actually left the property. Marcus walked out, circled around to a side entrance, and texted his surveillance team who were monitoring from unmarked vehicles in the parking lot. Confronted and removed by security guard Mitchell within 10 minutes. Clear profiling. Also observed active theft operation at luxury goods store while guard was focused on removing me. Proceeding to secondary observation point. The response came immediately. Copy. Continue operation. We're documenting all activity. Marcus changed his approach for the second entry. He removed his jacket, revealing a plain t-shirt underneath. He slicked back his hair. He walked with more confidence. He looked like someone who'd had a rough night, not someone who was chronically homeless. He entered through a different entrance and made his way to a different observation point, a seating area near the department stores. This time, he lasted almost 20 minutes before Derek spotted him again. You! Derek's voice was loud enough to draw attention from dozens of shoppers. I told you to leave. I did leave. Now I'm back. This is a public shopping mall during business hours. I don't care. You're banned. I'm calling the police. On what grounds? I haven't violated any law. Derek pulled out his radio. Security to all units. I need backup at the north wing. I have a trespasser refusing to leave. 3 more security guards converged on the scene within minutes. The situation was escalating exactly as the FBI had been warned it would. Aggressive security personnel who saw homeless individuals as threats to be removed rather than people with rights. One of the responding guards, an older man named Frank, seemed less aggressive. Derek, what's the situation? Homeless guy. Already removed him once. He came back. He's trespassing. Frank looked at Marcus, taking in his appearance. Sir, have you been asked to leave the property? Yes, but I left and returned. I'm not aware of any legitimate basis for being banned from a public shopping mall. It's private property, Derek insisted. We can refuse service to anyone. You can refuse service for legitimate reasons, Marcus corrected. You cannot refuse service based on someone's perceived socioeconomic status. That's discrimination. Derek stepped closer, his posture aggressive. You want to talk about discrimination? How about I discriminate my fist into your— Derek! Frank intervened, putting a hand on the younger guard's shoulder. That's enough. But the threat had been made, and it had been captured on multiple phones, including the body camera Marcus was wearing under his jacket. A camera connected to FBI surveillance equipment that was documenting everything. Sir, Frank said to Marcus, his tone more reasonable, I understand your position, but my colleague has asked you to leave. To avoid further escalation, would you be willing to go peacefully? Marcus considered. He'd gathered significant evidence already: discriminatory enforcement, threats of violence, security's complete failure to notice actual criminal activity happening around them while they focused on removing someone based purely on appearance. I'll leave, Marcus said, but I'll be filing formal complaints with mall management, corporate headquarters, and potentially pursuing legal action for discrimination. Derek scoffed. Good luck with that. Nobody cares what a homeless bum thinks. Marcus left through the main entrance for the second time. He walked to his car in a far corner of the parking lot, a nondescript sedan that no one would associate with law enforcement, and changed into professional clothes. Khakis, a button-down shirt, a blazer. He shaved using a kit he'd brought. He combed his hair properly. 20 minutes after being thrown out of the mall for the second time, Special Agent in Charge Marcus Thornton walked back into Riverside Mall looking every inch the successful professional he actually was. The transformation was complete. The same man who'd been harassed and threatened now moved through the mall without a single security guard giving him a second glance. He walked directly to the mall's administrative offices and asked to speak with the general manager. The receptionist, noting his professional appearance, was immediately accommodating. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to speak with the manager about a serious security issue." "Let me see if Mr. Peterson is available." 5 minutes later, Marcus was sitting in the office of Ronald Peterson, the mall's general manager, a man in his 50s who'd built a career in retail property management. "Mr. Thornton, is it? My receptionist said you have security concerns." Marcus pulled out his FBI credentials. "It's Special Agent in Charge Thornton. I'm with the FBI's Philadelphia field office." Ronald's expression shifted from polite interest to immediate concern. "FBI? What's this about?" "Your mall has a serious problem. For the past 6 months, organized retail theft rings have been operating here, costing your tenants hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've received complaints that some security personnel may be facilitating these operations. This morning, I conducted an undercover operation to assess your security protocols." "Undercover?" "I don't understand." Marcus pulled out his phone, showing photos of himself in homeless disguise. "For the past 2 hours, I've been in your mall dressed as a homeless individual. In that time, I was confronted twice by your senior security officer, threatened with violence, and forcibly removed, despite committing no crime and violating no legitimate mall policy." Ronald stared at the photos. "That's you?" "Yes. And while your security was focused on harassing me based on my appearance, I personally observed 3 separate theft operations happening in plain sight. Your security didn't notice because they were too busy removing someone they perceived as undesirable." I had no idea." Additionally, your senior security officer, Derek Mitchell, made physical threats, used discriminatory language, and violated multiple policies regarding treatment of guests. All of this is documented on video and audio recordings. Marcus pulled out a tablet, showing footage from his hidden camera. Derek's aggressive confrontations, his threats, his complete failure to notice actual criminal activity. Ronald watched in growing horror. "Special Agent Thornton, I apologize. This is completely unacceptable. It's not just unacceptable, it's potentially criminal. We're investigating whether security personnel at this and other malls are receiving payoffs to ignore specific theft operations. Derek Mitchell's behavior today suggests he's either grossly incompetent or deliberately directing attention away from actual crimes. What do you need from me?" "Full cooperation. Access to all security personnel files, schedules, and incident reports for the past year, surveillance footage from your security office, and Derek Mitchell suspended immediately, pending our investigation." Ronald picked up his phone. "Security office, this is Peterson. I need Derek Mitchell in my office immediately. Yes, now." 10 minutes later, Derek entered the office, his swagger still evident. He glanced at Marcus dismissively, not recognizing him in professional attire. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Peterson?" "Derek, do you recognize this man?" Derek looked more closely at Marcus, his expression shifting from dismissive to confused to horrified as recognition dawned. You were the homeless guy." "I'm Special Agent in Charge Marcus Thornton with the FBI, and you spent this morning harassing a federal agent, making threats of violence, and failing to perform the basic functions of your job while actual crimes occurred around you." Derek's face went white. "I didn't know." "You didn't know I was FBI. But that's irrelevant. Would your behavior have been acceptable if I was actually homeless? Is it your policy to threaten violence against vulnerable people, to remove them from public spaces for the crime of existing while poor?" "I was just doing my job. Your job is to maintain security. Instead, you profiled someone based on appearance, escalated a non-confrontation into a public scene, made physical threats, and ignored multiple theft operations happening in your direct line of sight." Marcus pulled up footage on his tablet showing Derek escorting him out while behind them, clearly visible in the frame, a theft operation was in progress. While you were forcibly removing me for sitting quietly on a bench, 3 people were stealing $15,000 worth of designer handbags from that store. They're visible in this footage. You never even looked in their direction." Derek had no response. Ronald spoke, his voice heavy. "Derek, you're suspended effective immediately. Turn in your equipment. Security will escort you out. Mr. Peterson, please. You threatened a guest with violence. You failed to perform basic security functions, and you've potentially exposed this mall to massive liability. You're done here." After Derek left, escorted by 2 other security guards who now knew he'd threatened an FBI agent, Ronald turned to Marcus. "What happens now? We continue our investigation. We'll review your security operations, interview your staff, analyze patterns of theft and security response. If we find evidence of corruption, security personnel receiving payoffs to ignore specific operations, there will be federal charges. And if there's no corruption, just incompetence, then you have a serious training and oversight problem. But either way, your security operation needs a complete overhaul. Because what I experience today is what vulnerable people experience every day: harassment, threats, and removal from public spaces simply because they don't look like what security guards consider desirable customers." The investigation continued for 3 more weeks. FBI agents reviewed thousands of hours of security footage, interviewed dozens of mall employees and retailers, and analyzed patterns of theft and security response. What they found was damning. Derek Mitchell and 2 other security guards were receiving regular cash payments from organizers of theft rings. In exchange, they provided advance warning of security sweeps, directed attention away from ongoing operations, and harassed innocent shoppers to create distractions. The aggressive removal of homeless individuals, teenagers, and people of color served multiple purposes. It intimidated legitimate customers who might report suspicious activity, created visual security theater that made mall management think guards were being proactive, and provided convenient distractions during major theft operations. Derek's confrontation with Marcus had been captured on video from multiple angles: shoppers' phones, mall security cameras, and Marcus's hidden camera. The footage went viral after being released as part of the FBI's public statement about the arrests. The video showed Derek's aggressive approach, his discriminatory language, his threat of violence, all directed at someone who was sitting quietly breaking no laws. The comments section exploded with people sharing similar experiences of being profiled, harassed, and removed from public spaces for looking suspicious. 3 security guards were arrested on federal charges including theft, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. The civil rights charges stemmed from their pattern of selectively harassing vulnerable populations while ignoring white, affluent shoppers engaging in identical behaviors. The mall's parent company faced a class action lawsuit from individuals who'd been wrongfully banned, harassed, or assaulted by security personnel based on discriminatory profiling. Ronald Peterson implemented sweeping reforms: mandatory anti-bias training for all security personnel, new protocols for addressing suspicious behavior that focused on actions rather than appearance, oversight mechanisms to prevent discriminatory enforcement, and a guest advocate position specifically to address complaints of unfair treatment. 6 months after the undercover operation, Marcus was invited to speak at a national retail security conference about recognizing and preventing bias in security operations. "I've spent 23 years in law enforcement," Marcus began, addressing several hundred security professionals. "I've worked undercover in dangerous situations, infiltrating drug organizations, gang operations, corruption networks, but I've never felt as dehumanized as I did spending 2 hours dressed as a homeless person in a shopping mall." The room was silent. Within 10 minutes of sitting on a public bench, reading a book, I was confronted by a security guard who decided I didn't belong, not because I was breaking any rules, not because I was threatening anyone, but because I looked homeless. And in his mind, homeless people don't deserve to exist in spaces designated for paying customers. He harassed me. He threatened me with violence. He forcibly removed me twice. And while he was focused on removing an imaginary threat, real crimes were happening all around him. Because that's what happens when security becomes about controlling who belongs rather than actually maintaining safety. Marcus pulled up the viral video of his confrontation with Derek. This footage has been viewed over 5 million times. The comments are full of people sharing their own experiences, being followed in stores because of their race, being removed from malls for wearing suspicious clothing, being harassed by security for existing in public while poor, while black, while young, while anything other than affluent and white. Derek Mitchell, the guard who confronted me, wasn't a random bad apple. He was the product of a security culture that prioritized appearance over action, that saw certain populations as threats to be removed rather than people with rights. And he was enabled by a system that never questioned why his incident reports disproportionately targeted people of color, homeless individuals, and teenagers. When we analyzed his performance data, we found he'd filed over 200 trespass warnings in the previous year. 83% of them targeted people of color. 47% involved homeless or apparently low-income individuals. Only 11% involved anyone who'd actually committed or attempted to commit a crime. He wasn't doing security. He was doing social cleansing, and he was praised for it because management mistook discriminatory harassment for proactive security. A security director in the audience raised her hand. What should we look for? How do we identify when legitimate security crosses into discrimination? Look at your data, Marcus replied. Who are your guards confronting? Is it proportional to your customer demographics? Are people of certain races, ages, or apparent socioeconomic status disproportionately stopped, questioned, or removed? If yes, you have a bias problem. Ask why someone is being confronted. Is it because of specific suspicious behavior? Or is it because they look out of place? Because looking out of place is often just code for doesn't look like our target demographic. And ask yourself, would we treat this person the same way if they were white, affluent, and conventionally presentable? If the answer is no, you're discriminating. Another security professional asked, but don't we have a responsibility to protect our paying customers? To maintain an environment they're comfortable in? That's the wrong question, Marcus said. The right question is, do we have a responsibility to treat all people with dignity and respect their rights regardless of their appearance? The answer is yes. Your paying customers' comfort doesn't supersede other people's right to exist in public spaces. If a customer is uncomfortable because a homeless person is sitting on a bench reading a book, that's the customer's problem to address through examining their own biases, not your justification for removing someone who's done nothing wrong. Real security focuses on behavior, not identity. Real security prevents actual crimes, not the imagined threat of undesirable people lowering property values. The conference ended with several major retail security companies committing to review their protocols and training for discriminatory bias. A year after the undercover operation, Marcus received a letter from an unexpected source. Derek Mitchell. The letter was carefully written, clearly the result of much thought. Special Agent Thornton, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. What I did that day, and what I'd been doing for years, was wrong. I convinced myself I was keeping people safe, but really I was just exerting power over people I'd decided weren't worthy of respect. I've spent this year in jail, facing the consequences of my actions. But more importantly, I've spent it confronting the biases that made me think harassing vulnerable people was acceptable. I've done anti-bias training. I've read books by people who've experienced homelessness. I've had my worldview completely dismantled. You were right about everything. I wasn't doing security, I was doing social cleansing, and I was praised for it, which made me think it was right. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that your undercover operation did more than catch criminals. It held up a mirror that forced me to see what I'd become, and I'm trying to become better. When I'm released, I plan to volunteer with homeless advocacy organizations to try to make amends for the harm I caused. It's not enough, but it's something. Thank you for doing what you did. Not just the undercover work, but speaking about it publicly, forcing people to confront how we treat the vulnerable in our society. Marcus never responded to the letter, but he kept it, a reminder that sometimes accountability leads to genuine change. 5 years after the undercover operation, Riverside Mall had become a model for inclusive security practices. Their protocols focused on behavior rather than appearance. Their data showed proportional enforcement across demographics. Their guest satisfaction scores had actually increased once security stopped harassing people. The reforms sparked by one FBI undercover operation had spread throughout the retail security industry. Major companies revised their training. Security associations developed new standards, and shopping malls across the country began examining their own data for patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Marcus continued his work at the FBI, eventually retiring after 28 years of service. At his retirement ceremony, the director mentioned the Riverside Mall operation specifically. Special Agent Thornton could have sent any agent undercover for this operation, but he chose to do it himself, to personally experience what vulnerable people face every day. That decision showed not just his commitment to the job, but his understanding that effective law enforcement requires empathy for all members of the community, not just the powerful. In his retirement speech, Marcus kept it brief. "I've investigated organized crime, corruption, violence. But the Riverside Mall operation taught me something crucial. Sometimes the most insidious abuses happen in plain sight, normalized as security or maintaining standards. The same biases that let security guards harass homeless people are the biases that let corrupt officers profile communities of color, that let powerful people abuse their authority against the vulnerable. Real justice means protecting everyone's rights, not just those with power or privilege. Real security means everyone feels safe, including and especially those society typically marginalizes. If my career accomplished anything, I hope it was showing that accountability applies to everyone, that bias has consequences, and that vulnerable people deserve dignity." The standing ovation was long and genuine. A decade after being threatened and forcibly removed from a mall for the crime of appearing homeless, Marcus Thornton was teaching criminal justice at a university, training the next generation of law enforcement to recognize bias and prioritize human dignity. One of his students asked, "Did you ever feel unsafe during the undercover operation?" "Physically? No, I knew backup was close. But psychologically, yes, because I experienced, in a very small way, what vulnerable people experience constantly. Being seen as a problem to be removed rather than a person with rights. Being treated as less than human because of how I looked. Having my presence criminalized for no reason other than someone with authority decided I didn't belong. That fear, the fear of being harassed, threatened, removed from a public space simply for existing, that's what millions of people live with every day. And that's the fear I hope my students will work to eliminate rather than perpetuate. Because sometimes the best way to understand injustice is to experience it yourself. And sometimes the FBI agent you threaten, harass, and forcibly remove from a public space is exactly the person with the authority to hold you accountable, and the commitment to ensuring what happened to him never happens to anyone else. If this story resonated with you, remember, homeless people are people. Their appearance doesn't make them criminals. Their poverty doesn't revoke their rights. And security that profiles based on appearance isn't security. It's discrimination with a badge. Share this with security professionals, retail workers, and anyone who makes decisions about who belongs in public spaces. Remind them that every person deserves dignity, regardless of how they look. Subscribe to Real Justice Stories for more tales of bias exposed, authority held accountable, and the power of experiencing injustice firsthand to create lasting change. Thank you for watching. Remember, the homeless person you harass today might be an FBI special agent in charge. But that shouldn't matter. Treat everyone with dignity, not because they might have power, but because dignity should be universal.